Thank you very much, and welcome. Father Mitch Packwell, welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from all over the world. Before we get to our guests, just want to mention that today is the feast of a really great saint, Saint Alphonsus Liguori. He was not only the founder of a religious order, but he was also known as one of the greatest of the moral theologians. He was born in 1696 and lived until 1787. Good old age. In that time, he really worked through questions about moral theology that really kept concern for the pastoral issues and the individuals and situations, and yet maintained a strong commitment to the moral teaching of Christ. He was trained as a lawyer, and when he wanted to become a priest, his father was extremely upset. But he pursued the vocation to the priesthood and found his community. He also, toward the end of his life, he'd been, of course, the superior of the order, and they almost kicked him out of the order, his own order, because he wasn't able to do that job when he got into his late years. But he's retired from being the superior and, went on to die and become a great saint. So we celebrate him today. Now we also have a guest tonight. He is the editor of EWTN Publishing. This is our new collaboration to publish books, a collaboration between EWTN and Sophia Institute Press. And our guest is here to talk about the absolutely great Polish Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski, whose heroic virtue was officially confirmed by Pope Francis just some months ago, bestowing upon Cardinal Wyszynski the title of Venerable. Wyszynski's very popular book, originally called All You Who Labor, which was first published some 20 years ago, is now being re-released by EWTN Publishing under the title Sanctify Your Daily Life: How to Transform Work into a Source of Strength, Holiness, and Joy. So please welcome the editor of EWTN Publishing, Mr. Brandon Mcginley. Brandon, welcome.
Thank you very much, Barry.
Good to have you here.
It's great to be here.
So you're even publishing some of the stuff I write, eh?
We have done that, yes.
Yes. Well, I guess I'll behave, maybe. But it's this book that we're here to talk about by Cardinal Wyszynski. Mm-hmm. And it was originally published in Polish as The Spirit of Work, yes, as I recall. Yeah. And this is an important book because it was read so much, yeah, especially in Europe, yeah, more so than here. Before we go into the topic, tell us a little bit about the life of Stefan Cardinal Wyszynski.
Absolutely. Cardinal Wyszynski was born in 1901 in the eastern part of Poland. At that time, it was actually part of Russia, and was ordained at a relatively young age, at the age of 23. In fact, he was quite seriously ill at the time of his ordination, and it's said that the presiding bishop thought he might not even live much longer. Like, we'll ordain him anyway, he won't be a priest for long. And he goes on to live 80 long years and became one of the most well-known Catholic prelates in the world, and certainly known by many in Poland as the leader, functionally the leader of Poland under communist occupation. Now, Cardinal Wyszynski was served as a bishop both under served as a priest both under Nazi occupation and then under communist occupation. It was around the end of World War II that he was elevated to be a bishop, and it was around that time actually that he then writes the book that we now have re-released as Sanctify Your Daily Life in 1946.
And the fact that he survived under the Nazis is amazing. The Nazis executed a third of all the priests in Poland. They were looking for them, executing seminarians. They wanted to destroy the leadership of the church.
Yeah.
And that he survived is one of those real blessings.
And he wasn't just hiding somewhere. He was serving as a chaplain for the resisting forces in Poland.
Mm-hmm. And which he didn't advertise that he was part of the resistance.
Yes, I imagine so.
Yeah, but it was a very extraordinary, difficult time, and we did not experience anywhere close to the devastation Europe did.
Yes.
But Poland received, the brunt of the devastation. Only Berlin was more devastated. Maybe, and there might have been a couple, maybe Dresden, might have been a couple German cities that were bombed more, but Warsaw was 85% leveled.
Yes.
Leveled. Yes. And he's serving as a priest amidst the rubble of this city. Yeah. That was one of the great cities of Europe at one time, and it was just leveled.
Yeah. And I think that historical context, the context of his life, is important for understanding both why he wrote the book that he did, and the content of that book. The content is timeless, but it also does emerge from a particular era. It emerges out of both an ideological context, the context of Nazi occupation, and then immediately afterwards, communist occupation, but it also emerges out of a time of devastation, a time when there was a lot of work to do, and a time when the ideological context kind of plays into this, where work was not seen as being quite as personally valuable as he articulates in this book. Under Nazism, work was seen as valuable only in as much as it served the state. And under communism, the same thing. They would articulate it slightly differently, but the idea was the same, that work has a social value and only a social value. And Cardinal Wyszynski is very clear that yes, work has a social value, but that social value, first of all, must emerge from an interior disposition, and second of all, is valuable primarily in as much as it points us toward the common good, and the common good is related, of course, to God himself.
Well, let's take a look and unpack some of that. Again, a lot of folks really don't remember that the word Nazi is an acronym. That's not the name of the party. Of course, they're called the Nazis. But it stood for the National Socialist Workers' Party.
Right.
And you look at the name of the party, National Socialists and Workers' Party. This is a group that's going to be there for the folks. And, it was clearly set up in the 1920s in competition to the Marxist and communist parties in Germany. Marx was, from Germany, Karl Marx, and he thought that Germany would be the place of the great Marxist revolution, and there were a lot of Marxists whose purpose was for the working people, the proletariat. That's the word for the workers in factories, as opposed to peasants who worked in the farms, and then the owners and the nobility. These were different classes of people. The proletariat, or the workers, were supposed to own all their own factories. That was the goal of Marxism. Put the means of production in the hands of the workers. And until that's quite there, the state will just run things. And with National Socialism, the Nazis, they also had the state in control of most of the economy.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, both regimes, both the Nazi regime and the communist regime, qualify as a totalitarian regime. They felt that, or their ideology was that the state had a claim on the entire person. And of course, these were both atheistic regimes. In the case of the Nazi regime, perhaps we could say it was a pagan kind of regime, but functionally an atheistic regime in which there's an idol, and the idol is the state, and the state is itself is seen as a kind of as protecting the Volk, the people, the race, the kind of the German ethnicity, which is an idolatry, of course.
Yeah, and even the Nazis or the National Socialists did use a lot of pagan imagery from old German paganism. They were influenced by the occult, especially by the Theosophical Society. Hitler picked up a lot of these ideas from Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophists in Vienna back in 1909 and a few years later. But that was window dressing for him. That was something on the side. The real issue was the state has control, and the workers are there for the purposes of the state.
Yes, yes.
And same with the communists.
Absolutely.
Everything is for the state.
Yep, yeah. And so you see Cardinal Wyszynski writing in that context, arguing for not a deeply individualistic view, but a view that still values the dignity of the individual, that asserts the dignity of the individual and the dignity of individual work, not just oriented towards the state, but oriented towards the interior perfection of the whole person and oriented towards God.
This is a very important part of his theology in this book, because he begins not with economic theory.
Right.
He starts off with Genesis chapter 1 and how God said, let us make man in our own image, in the image and likeness of God, let us make him, male and female, let us make him in the image and likeness of God.
Yes.
And let them subdue and have dominion over the earth.
Yeah.
That's what he starts with.
Yes.
Who we are before God.
Yep.
And that we are meant to be images of God and not cogs in the machine of the state.
Yes.
Would that be?
Absolutely. He makes a really beautiful analogy between God and man, and then between man and matter. And so we are participating with God in the forming of God's creation. And Cardinal Wyszynski would argue that by subduing creation, by subduing kind of the lower orders of creation, by subduing nature, we are not only kind of participating with God, but we are actually doing God's work here on earth.
Yeah, the terminology in the Bible of subduing and having dominion is something that God does. This is God's role. And it's as if we are the viceroys of God. God is the king of the universe, but we are viceroys.
Yes.
And that we act here, and through us, there's and you think about dogs. Do you know many wild dogs?
Not too many.
Okay, well, I've been attacked by them.
Sure.
In the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
Surrounded by a pack of wild dogs. Dogs that are wild are nasty and vicious, whereas dogs that we have raised have they're humanized in many ways.
Yeah.
And we improve their dogginess.
Yes.
Doesn't that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Especially if you've been surrounded by wild dogs. I'm not even talking about coyotes or wolves. That's another problem. But these are real dogs.
Right.
And in the wild, a pack is very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
Stupid, but dangerous.
Yes. Yeah. I just couldn't help but think of the moment in The Little Prince when the fox is teaching the Little Prince what it means to tame, and he says to tame means to establish ties, and And of course, it made me think, first of all, what we're talking about, that we tame, when we domesticate animals, we tame them, we establish ties with them, we establish a relationship. So if we take that ties and rework that as to establish a relationship, then also when we work with nature, there's that word, work. When we work with nature, we're establishing a relationship with nature that was established by God for us. And then we kind of take that analogy that he makes between man and matter and between God and man. God has a relationship with us. And so there's that analogy again, that by working with nature, we are acting in a similar way to that God does when he makes and works with us.
And, there's, by the way, I escaped from those wild dogs. You know how I did it?
How?
As I was walking along, they were walking in a circle around me, looking for a moment to attack, okay? So what I did is I stepped into this Chicago traffic, and they were afraid to come among the cars. I wasn't real excited about the idea either, but it was safer to be with the cars in traffic than it was with these wild dogs.
Yeah, well, the cars are still run by humans. At least then they were. Not so much these days. You can have cars that aren't. But
very much. But the point that we're trying to make is that we have this relationship with nature.
Yes.
And we can make these improvements. Doesn't mean that everything we do in nature is an improvement.
Yes.
But we also can know that when our interference with nature does not make it better, we can recognize it.
Yes. Yes.
The animals can't.
Right.
They don't know when to back off. They'll eat all the stuff in an environment and then go on if they, at times.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point. It goes to something that he comes to again and again and again, is that the value of work must be tied to a relationship with God. Our work must be dedicated to him. And so when we are subduing nature, when we are forming nature to make it more suitable for human beings to live, to flourish in, if we're doing that with an eye to God, if we're doing that for him, for his greater glory, so that we can create more human beings who can further glorify him, that is the kind of subduing of nature that is beautiful, that is a participation with God. But when we're doing it for our own ends, when we're doing it merely to gratify our own desire to subdue or to have dominion, rather than to do so with an eye to God, that not only is not meritorious, and again, as he says again and again, that work that's not oriented to God is not meritorious. It's also dangerous and destructive.
Sometimes even sinful.
Absolutely.
When human beings have tried to control nature for selfish reasons and no concern for the greater good of the earth and other human beings and the glory of God, that's when it can become seriously sinful.
Yes.
Another point he makes about the beginning too, that I think is worth to comment on. He says it was not intended before the fall that human beings would not work. God did not create us to sit around and be fed by him. We're not laying back with no clothes on, because I didn't have any clothes.
Right.
So that we're not sitting back naked and God is feeding us grapes.
Right.
This we were meant to work.
Yes.
And that's in creation, so that work is part of the good of being human. It's not a punishment to work.
Right. Adam and Eve had to tend the garden. But what he does say is, so to recapitulate your point, I think is exactly right, and Cardinal Wyszynski's point, that we often hear, it's kind of, I think there's an idea that's kind of out in the ether, that that work is a punishment of the fall. When in fact, what Cardinal Wyszynski is very keen to point out is that the difficulties that now come from work, the pain, the hardship that comes from work,
the sweat of the brow.
Yes, exactly. You will now earn your food by the sweat of your brow. Exactly. That is what is the product of the fall. And it doesn't mean it can't be redeemed. Of course it can be redeemed. Our work can be sanctifying. That's part of probably the primary point of the entire book. But that suffering that comes from work, that is a product of the fall.
And you see how it's the earth will be hard, and there'll be the thorns and thistles, and the sweat of your brow. You'd almost think that they had written that, or when they got kicked out of paradise, they were sent to South Texas, because over there in South Texas, everything has some sort of a thorn that's going to stick you, and the ground is hard.
Yeah.
And you know, even sometimes to feed cattle, they have to burn the spikes off of cactus plants when it's so dry that there's nothing to eat, no more grass. They just go in with flamethrowers, burn off all the stickers on the cactus, and the cattle just follow right behind that flamethrower, eating that because there's nothing else.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard. That's part of the punishment.
Absolutely, absolutely. That was really that was very important that he talk about that, because while the book was written in 1946 and there's the ideological context of the end of Nazism, the beginning of communism in Poland, at least. There's also the context of this is still a generation that remembers industrialization, or at least has a kind of a 1 or 2 generation separation from it, when their work had always been hard, but the work of the factory, the work of the physical labor and often a labor that was repetitive and monotonous, exactly. He's very important for him to talk about the difficulty of work, and again, and how it can be redemptive, how it can be sanctifying, even the most difficult work, even the most monotonous work. Now, it doesn't mean that those who are directing work don't have a responsibility to treat people like humans and to give them work that is actually meaningful. He's very keen on that as well, that the directors of work, the employer, also has a duty to treat employees as full human beings, giving them work that is meaningful, that can help them pursue their vocation as full human beings who are supposed to who are made to glorify God, made to have a relationship with Him. But even if you are in a situation where your work is monotonous, where it is almost demeaning to the human person, doing it is still redemptive. You can still work off that time in purgatory he talks about by doing that work in a way that is conscientious and diligent.
There's and there are a number of things that he wants people. That is one thing I loved about this.
Human as we were when we weren't working, and so that's one of the things that I think whether in our world today or in the world of Cardinal Wyszynski, this idea that our duties to God are separable. That we can kind of disintegrate them into different parts of life, but in fact he's arguing for a deeply integrated view of life, that man serves God not just at Mass, not just when he prays at home, but 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether he's at work or at leisure.
Well, in one sense, it's had some priest friend of mine on last year talking about the importance of the morning offering, that we offer even the drudgery of work and the difficulty of work to God. That this is also our gift, and for a lot of, especially for parents, they're doing this for the sake of raising their children, supporting their family members, all this, this is also something of an offering that is part of that relationship with God.
Yes.
And labor, according to Cardinal Wyszynski.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned parents too, because work is not just limited to wage labor. Work includes many things that are not compensated. Work includes, or at least not compensated with money that is, funneled through, the taxes and so on and so forth. It is work. Work happens in all aspects of life. Work happens in parenting, of course. Work happens. Work happens in volunteer work. It happens in many aspects of life.
And in caring for elderly and sick members of the family.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of work.
A lot of work. Work that I think sadly is done less and less, at least in homes, in family homes. But that's the type of work that is sanctifying just as much as working in a factory, just as much as working in an office.
And a lot of that work may have key moments when it's just such a joy, and it has a lot of other moments in which it's kind of boring, and changing babies' diapers is not the most exciting part of the relationship you have with a child. That's a lot of work.
It is.
And that's part of it, because also they don't cry to change their diaper only on your schedule.
Yes.
I take it you have kids?
Yes.
Did they cry when you fit your schedule?
Usually not.
No.
We haven't quite trained them that well. We're working on it, but it's not coming along yet.
Well, by the time they're 20, they'll be
it reminds me, this conversation about parenting especially reminds me of one of the virtues of work that Cardinal Wyszynski talks about, which is one that I think most people are going to have to go to the dictionary to look up, but it's one that would have been recognizable in the era in which he was writing, which is longanimity, which is this idea of having a long-term outlook and accepting short-term difficulties and sometimes short-term monotony, doing the everyday aspects of work with an eye towards a long-term future, maybe a future we won't even see. One of the beautiful examples he uses is the idea of a farmer planting an orchard. And the farmer may not ever see those fruit. He may see some early fruits, but he may never see those trees come to their full maturity. And yet that work in that moment is deeply meaningful. And having that view, almost like a God's eye view of the world, that is looking beyond the time horizons that we can even see. And for him, that's one of the great virtues of work. And you see that in farming, of course. You see it in parenting. The everyday toil of discipline and of diapers and of all that is looking towards a future that we have an idea of what it might look like, but we can't see it yet. Yeah.
I remember. I don't know this area of farming very well, but I remember hearing that it takes 80 years for a date palm to become mature enough, fully mature. And so the people who plant the date palm grows for sure will not see those dates come to full maturity.
Exactly.
People plant them anyway, and that's a good point. We want to talk about these virtues because he brings up, there's a whole section on different virtues that are developed in work. And we need to address it. We'll take a break first.
Sure.
So we'll be back in a couple of minutes and we'll continue dealing with the topic here of virtue in work and becoming holy as we go through work. So please stay with us. Right, welcome back. We are talking about a wonderful book called Sanctify Your Daily Life, How to Transform Work into a Source of Strength, Holiness, and Joy. And it is written by Cardinal Wyszynski. Now again, this book is available. It's published by EWTN. It's available at our religious catalog. It's item number 80640. You can get it online, EWTNRC.com, or you can call them, 1-800-854-6316. And I really did enjoy reading it. And one of the things I found most fascinating, partly because it's not a topic that we deal with very much in our modern culture, namely discussion of virtues. Yeah. We don't talk about virtues. We kind of have I think, naive assumption that people want to be virtuous. Mm-hmm. But I've been hearing confessions now for 42 years. Mm-hmm. Get over the naivete. Some people do seek virtue and struggle, mm-hmm. and some people don't even try. Mm. When we talk about virtues with work, what are some of the ones? You mentioned longanimity.
Yes.
Having that long-term view, yeah. and being willing to have a sense of putting up with a lot to, yeah. get your ultimate goals and not just your immediate goals.
Exactly.
What are some of the other virtues?
If I remember correctly, actually, the first one that he talks about, and I think meaningfully so, is patience. Patience.
Yes, that's right. It is.
And he distinguishes patience from a few things that are very close to patience. But the word that he uses a lot when he talks about patience is sadness. We might also
yes.
we would also think of like melancholy or the sense of kind of meaninglessness, I think. Mm-hmm. And for him, excuse me, patience is the way that we combat sadness in work. Mm-hmm. Patience is the way that and it's tied to these other virtues, and he sees it really as a kind of the font almost from which many other virtues spring, is that by allowing us to combat this sense of melancholy or sadness, patience allows us to pursue other virtues in work that otherwise would be overwhelmed by the sense mm-hmm. of kind of brooding melancholy or brooding dissatisfaction. Mm-hmm. That would distract us from pursuing other virtues and ultimately from doing what he recommends that we do and says that can be done by virtue of the nature of work, which is turn work itself into a prayer.
Yeah, he wants to make sure we distinguish patience from perseverance.
Yes.
And I'd never thought of that.
Yes.
But the idea that your work depresses you.
Right.
Partly, I think, and one of the big difficulties of the present era yeah. is people don't have a sense of hope.
Right, yes.
I sense a hollowness in a lot yes. of people because they don't know what it is they're hoping in
Exactly.
They're afraid to hope for things from God. Hoping for heaven is oftentimes not. Sometimes they rather assume they're going to go to heaven,
right.
as in the MGM movie series, All Dogs Go to Heaven, Part 1 and Part 2. They would like to accept, I'll be one of the dogs going to heaven. Or you even hear incredible foolishness among Christians who say, well, next lifetime I'll come back as a dog. I don't know what kind of dog food they feed, but why they think that would be a good goal just boggles my mind. I wouldn't want to eat that stuff. So that lack of hope is missing, and as a result, people feel sadness and melancholy. Like, what's the purpose of my life?
Right. Yes.
That's what I think it's what he's.
And this gets to several things. One is, first of all, just the timelessness of the book, because he's writing this in the 1940s. He's writing this 70 years ago, and yet that sense of meaninglessness in our daily work is perhaps even more acute than ever. And I think that particular aspect of it, especially the focus on hope, the focus on patience and these other virtues as both springing from hope. We have the theological virtue of hope, this hope in God, hope in salvation, not an expectation of salvation, but a hope in salvation. But it also then, these virtues that we can cultivate in our daily work then help to cultivate that virtue of hope, that when we are focusing on patience and perseverance, and you said, that he draws a distinction between these things, and I think it's important. Cardinal Wyszynski sees patience, or describes patience in the kind of classical sense, as being a virtue that we work on interiorly. It's an interior disposition of hope, an interior disposition to combat the kind of the meaninglessness, the felt meaninglessness of work by dedicating it to God. Perseverance is an exterior virtue, to push through with our bodies and with our minds, and that it's a virtue of the will to say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the daily work, even the daily monotonous work that seems so unappealing, for a purpose that is higher than anything that I might be able to see right now. But here's that word again. We have hope in that higher purpose.
I think that's a very important thing. But you mentioned how hope is a theological virtue.
Yes.
So folks understand what that means.
Yeah.
It's not something that you study in a theology book.
Yes.
That's not why they call it that.
Yeah.
Hope is so powerful, in fact, that St. Paul writes in Romans chapter 8 that hope now saves you. Because it is a virtue that God gives you by His grace.
Right.
You have to be open to it.
Yeah.
You have to accept that grace. But it is God giving you that gift of hope in Him.
Yes. And it's not a blind hope. It's not a hope in the way that I hope my team wins this game. It's not. It's a hope that comes from grace. It's a hope in something real and substantial that we know and believe in, and we have faith in. There's another theological virtue, faith. But it's a hope that springs from something that we know to be true about God and His salvation. But we want to distinguish it, of course, from presumption. It's not the hope. Hope is not I will be saved. It's that I can be saved.
And God is the one who's going to work in me, and I'm going to cooperate with Him to be saved.
Yes.
It's His work, and I go along with what He does. And it's also, I think especially in the context of Cardinal Wyszynski's life, where there's a distinction between hope and optimism.
Yes.
Optimism is when human beings come up with all sorts of plans for how to make the world a perfect place. And those are human designs. Nazism was an example of that. National Socialism was what the Nazis were promoting, that this would be a complete paradise for the people who were German.
Right.
And the people who were of Aryan background. Everybody else would have to be killed off.
Right,
To make that paradise.
Yes.
And then with communists, It was this, Marxist workers' paradise.
Right.
That was their optimism. We'll make a perfect paradise here on earth. And they ended up making both of them. The Nazis, the National Socialists, and the Communists made hell on earth for their people.
Yeah, I think this is really important because this distinction between hope and optimism. Because for the communists and the Nazis, it was an optimism without hope. They didn't believe that they could create good things on earth by doing good things. They only believed that they could do it through destruction. It was absolutely part of the ideology that blood had to be spilled in order to make things happen, in order to create the kind of the conditions for optimism to take hold.
Their phrase was, "You can't make an omelet unless you break some eggs."
Right. Yes.
And it wasn't eggs they broke. It was human lives.
Yes, yes. And the hope we're describing is the hope that, yes, you can live a good life. You can live even in the most difficult circumstances. Cardinal Wyszynski lived for more than 40 years under either Nazism or communism. It's pretty hard to be optimistic when that is your day-to-day existence. And yet, he was full of hope. The hope that even in these circumstances, Christ can still reign.
Exactly.
That even in these circumstances, we can still live a deeply Christian life. And he did so to such a degree that even though he spent 3 years in imprisonment under communism, that upon his death in 1981, the beauty of his life and his witness was so recognized that even in communist Poland, they declared 4 days of mourning for him. That even the communists celebrated his life because he had been such a witness of what it can be to live well and to shepherd his flock, the entire Polish people, well, despite the circumstances they were in. And now to this day, of course, in non-communist Poland, there are statues of him everywhere, and he is seen as one of the great heroes of Polish history.
It's a very important thing to note, because this is something that entered into my life in a way, in a small way. In 1956, he and the other bishops of Poland rooted their hope in the fact that Poland had become Christian. And they used a 10-year period between 1956 and 1966 to prepare for the 1,000th anniversary of the Christianization of Poland. The first king, Mcginley, was baptized a Catholic with all the boys in his gang back in 966. And he wanted the Polish people to realize this is our hope.
Yes.
Jesus Christ changing our culture.
Yes.
And that made a huge difference.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And that this idea of Christ not just acting in individual lives, but acting in the lives of a people, acting in the lives of the community. And this goes back to his whole theology of work, that work is meaningful personally and meaningful communally and meaningful as an entire human race working towards the common good together through shaping God's creation.
And this point of seeing that the state does not give us this hope.
Right.
It doesn't give us our rights, doesn't give us our dignity, but God does.
Right.
And God created us in His image. The state did not create us.
Yes.
God gives us dignity in our work, even after the fall.
Yes, yes.
That our labor is not meaningless, but our labor has purpose in much wider ways than we can see.
Right.
And having hope is the antidote to the sadness that makes us impatient.
Yes, exactly. You said, even after the fall, even in kind of industrial factories as they were first being developed and are still developed today, even as a peasant, even under Nazism, even under communism, our work can have value if we dedicate it to Him. And then, of course, thinking today in our circumstances, in kind of 21st century America, even if we aren't making a ton of money, our work is valuable. Even if and if we are making a ton of money, and this is really important for him, our work is valuable not because it's made us money, but because we're dedicating it to God. And if we are working just for profit, just out of kind of monetary considerations, then that work is not meritorious in God's eyes. It is when we do that work and dedicate it to Him first.
In fact, I would even add that it's when we work only for the money, it becomes a new kind of slavery. I used to tell my students, I taught, at the university, and I frequently had freshman introductory courses to the Bible and such. And I would tell them, especially the first semester, if you are here at the university and your only goal of an education is to make money, then by all means, make a lot of it. Make as much as you can, as quickly as you can. Make a ton of it right away, because by the time you're 45, you're going to need all that money for the divorce lawyers and for the psychiatrists. Because your life will be meaningless.
Yes, and that's a different kind of sadness in work. The sadness of, rather than meaninglessness of daily monotonous toil, there's the meaninglessness of work that is not monotonous, but work that is still meaningless.
Yeah.
And that I think is something that I think people reading this book will recognize, if not in themselves, then in the world around them.
Another point that he makes about having interiority, that is having a prayer life. Cardinal Wyszynski talks about how important it is to integrate our prayer with our work. It's only in that context that we can gain wisdom about the meaning of our work, because that wisdom about our work comes from God and our relationship to God.
Yes, exactly. At every turn, every time he's talking about something that has to do with the exterior properties of work, the actual day-to-day working, the actual kind of craftsmanship with your hands, he is always keen to bring it back to the interiority of work, the interior life, and that if we are letting work, or if the kind of conditions under which we're living is demanding that work crowd out that interiority, that if work is not letting us have time to cultivate that interiority, not just in work but outside of work, to cultivate a prayer life, to cultivate a relationship with God in leisure and not just in work, then that is gravely unjust. At the very end of the book, he talks about Sunday, the Lord's Day, something as simple as Sunday, that has been so lost in our culture, and is so essential that God Himself even rests on the seventh day in Genesis 1, and that day is His promise to us. It's a sign of His covenant with us.
It says in the commandment to keep holy the Sabbath. It's not just rest. It includes the sanctification of the day by worship and adoration of God and prayer. Oftentimes people will say, well, I can go out on the golf course and I can, give praise to God out there. Well, actually, I've heard some of the people from the golf course, and they mention God, but it's not praise.
Have you watched me golf? Because I'm a little concerned.
No. Actually, I've never golfed myself, but I know the golfers. And I would that they were praising God, but that's not what I'm hearing coming out of their mouths. I don't know that hymn. And so this is something where we need to have that time of adoration and worship of God, and rest and leisure from our work.
The word holiday is just holy day. In English, we've just scrunched them together into one word. But and holy days were historically not just days of rest, like you said, but days of feasting, days of communal participation. So it's not just you going up by yourself to pray, but it's the community coming together to celebrate in an integrated way the feast of a saint, or on Sunday, just the feast of our Lord, and doing that as a community. And so then that gets to the idea of there being a communal obligation to keep the day holy. Not just me and you doing it, but everybody, the society doing it. And when society makes that nearly impossible, makes it possible maybe for you to do it on your own, but not possible to do it as a community, because we've organized things such that Sunday is just like any other day, maybe with a little bit more rest here or there, maybe with a little bit of football, or golf, as the case may be, then society is organized in a way that is deeply unjust.
Well, even to use the analogy of football and golf tournaments and baseball games, why do people like to go to the park? Because of the communal experience of fellow fans for their teams.
Yes. It's also liturgical.
Exactly.
Yeah, a football game, it has, or golf. We'll use football because that's like the iconic Sunday thing. It has parts of it. Exactly, it has parts. There's a pregame show. There's a first half. There's a halftime show. All of these things, they go in a predictable format. It's a ritual, and often one that replaces the ritual of the Mass.
Yep.
It's almost it's like it's a secular Mass in a sense.
Now, it's a good thing that you see a lot of those football games, that they do have that sign, John 3:16.
Yeah.
But you even see that liturgical aspect of the football games when it gets messed up, as the players for the last couple seasons have been taking a knee at one of the important secular liturgical events of singing the national anthem.
Right.
And people protesting, various aspects of the country at that point and not celebrating. And as a result, it's not only that people don't come to Mass, they're not going to the football games.
Yeah, and it goes to how football has replaced Mass, has replaced any sort of Christian obligation, because it's taken that place of primacy in our hearts and minds, such that to mess up the liturgy, it affects us personally in a way that as if this were the most important thing in our lives, and to mess up the liturgy is to offend us in a personal way. Whereas that place should be taken by something else, that primacy.
And I think for all of us to have a sense that our labor and our rest from labor are part of a rhythm. We see that God asks one day to worship and rest in Him, and to rest with our family. And 6 days are for the different kinds of labor. And we've even reduced, for most people, to 5 days. But this is something that's very important. And we're seeing in some ways, and our economy is getting a bit better. The joblessness is going down. More people are getting jobs. Wages seem to be improving. Those are good things. But I think to have this book as a way to help us see the meaningfulness of it. I want, again, for people to make sure they take a look at this. It's called Sanctify Your Daily Life, How to Transform Work into a Source of Strength, Holiness, and Joy. I love the idea that holiness is part of your work and your rest. Again, this is by Cardinal Wyszynski. You can go to our religious catalog. It's item 80640. And you can get it at EWTNRC.com, or you can call 1-800-854-6316. Thanks for coming over here to be with us tonight, and for editing this book. I think it's a very important thing for us to do, and I hope all of us use this as an opportunity. Well, thank you. And I'd like to give you a blessing to you and your labors of all different kinds. Almighty God bless you and keep you and cause His face to shine upon you. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And we can have not only these programs, also these books and radio and internet and all that, for one reason only, because the network is brought to you by you. Please keep us in between your gas bill, electric bill, and cable bill, and we will pay our bills too. God bless you and thank you.